Welcome to an exploration of medieval beauty standards, a realm where aspirations defied modern sensibilities. Here, the ideal was not robust health, but rather an almost ethereal frailty, suggesting a life untouched by manual labor. Before we delve deeper, we invite you to acknowledge our work by liking this video and subscribing, should you find genuine value in our content. Please share your location and current time in the comments. It is always enlightening to connect with our global audience. Now, dim your surroundings, perhaps allow a gentle fan to create a subtle ambiance, and let us commence this historical odyssey. The allure of pallor, a proclamation of status. In the medieval world, a pale complexion transcended mere physical appearance. It functioned as a powerful social signifier. Far from suggesting ill health, it was a deliberate fashion statement, a silent proclamation of immense wealth. Unlike contemporary ideals that celebrate a vibrant, sun-kissed glow indicative of an active lifestyle, medieval aesthetics inverted this paradigm. Tan skin was unequivocally associated with outdoor labor, signifying poverty, and, gasp, manual work, a cardinal sin against 14th century beauty. Therefore, the paler one's skin, the higher their perceived social standing. This pursuit of pallor was not a quest for a subtle ivory hue. We refer to a translucent, almost porcelain-like complexion with discernible vascular undertones. Imagine skin so luminous it suggested a recent spectral encounter, or indeed, the wearer being a specter themselves. Naturally, human physiology rarely cooperates with such extreme ideals, particularly for individuals possessing functional circulatory systems. Thus, medieval society intervened. Noble women, and occasionally noble men, resorted to applying white lead powder to their faces. This provided the coveted corpse-chic luminescence, albeit with the perilous side effect of gradual lead poisoning. Yet, throughout history, beauty has invariably demanded its price. Alternative methods included vinegar-soaked cloths for skin bleaching, or a concoction of crushed pearls and egg whites. This latter mixture not only lightened the complexion, but reportedly left the cheeks with the peculiar sensation of a stale omelet. To further enhance the illusion of delicate fragility, artisans would sometimes paint blue veins onto arms and chests using pigments, simulating an almost transparent skin. Even the literary works of the period embraced this aesthetic, with romantic poems describing women as pale as milk, white as snow, or poetically, the moon in winter. Eloquent ways of implying a woman on the verge of fainting, a truly desirable trait. This pale aesthetic was more than a superficial preference. It served as shorthand for class purity and complete economic disengagement from agricultural pursuits. To afford such an appearance of fragility was to win the medieval beauty game. The perilous art of medieval cosmetics. The pursuit of the coveted, almost otherworldly pale complexion often necessitated a profound commitment, a gradual decorative form of chemical warfare. Nature, simply put, was insufficient. Thus, individuals turned to cosmetics, specifically lead-based white face powder. Yes, the very element we now meticulously remediate from historical structures was once considered a cutting-edge beauty innovation. The desired outcome was a smooth, pale, matte finish, the medieval equivalent of high-definition foundation, rendering the skin seemingly flawless until it inevitably ceased to be. White lead powder was meticulously produced by combining vinegar with metal, allowing it to corrode into a white crust, which was then ground into a fine powder. Daily application was believed to transform the wearer into a luminous, delicate aristocrat, harboring a subtle, self-inflicted death wish. Should the skin begin to flake, blister, or detach in small inconvenient fragments, it was paradoxically viewed as an indication that the product was effectively working. This was rarely a minimalist beauty regimen. Many added mercury-based rouge for a touch of color or chalk dust for enhanced longevity. Egg whites were frequently brushed over the face to achieve a smooth, glazed appearance. Essentially, if an ingredient could be sourced from a farm or an alchemist's shelf, it likely found its way onto a medieval face in the name of elegance. The inherent dangers, beyond the self-evident slow poisoning, encompassed chronic fatigue, skin ulcers, hair loss, and premature death, consequences conspicuously absent from modern skincare labels. Nevertheless, the fashion endured. Faced with the stark choice between a slow, elegant demise and being misidentified as a peasant, the nobility often opted for the more aesthetically pleasing route to the grave. Men were not entirely immune to these trends. Male courtiers, particularly in later medieval and early Renaissance courts, adopted various powders and skin treatments where personal image often rivaled lineage in importance, or at least provided a more pleasant scent than one's rivals. The elevated forehead, a testament to nobility. Among the most distinctive medieval beauty trends was the pronounced emphasis on high foreheads, a literally eyebrow-raising endeavor, given that eyebrows were actively removed to achieve this aesthetic. A tall, smooth, unbroken forehead was not merely fashionable, it was considered a mark of elegance, intelligence, and even divine favor. It represented the architectural pinnacle of the medieval face, silently conveying, "My days are spent in pious reflection and contemplative gazes from castle windows, not with a shovel in hand." To attain this noble visage, women undertook extreme and often uncomfortable measures. Eyebrows were entirely plucked, and in some instances, scalp hair was incrementally removed to recede the hairline further. This was not a minor adjustment, it was a comprehensive forehead expansion project. Medieval grooming manuals advocated the use of tweezers, hot compresses, and depilatory creams concocted from peculiar ingredients such as cat dung, quicklime, or vinegar-soaked leeches, all dedicated to showcasing a forehead ample enough to serve as a sundial. The resulting appearance was striking. Portraits from the era often depict women with serene expressions and foreheads so expansive they could conceivably host a miniature joust. When combined with a pale complexion and soft facial features, this high dome aesthetic became the quintessential representation of refined beauty. This trend was not confined to the face. Fashion actively supported it. Close-fitting hoods, wimples, and hennins, the iconic cone-shaped hats, all contributed to elevating the hairline, or at the minimum, discreetly concealing the absence of eyebrows. This was not an isolated aristocratic whim. From England to France to Italy, noble women embraced the high forehead style, a preference reinforced by artists and poets who extolled women whose countenances seemingly commenced near the crown of their heads. Naturally, not everyone possessed the resources or patience for such meticulous self-grooming. In a stroke of medieval ingenuity, some women ingeniously simulated the look by drawing their new forehead line slightly higher and concealing the natural hairline with headbands or veils. Indeed, the Middle Ages had its own sophisticated version of contouring, albeit one that relied heavily on elaborate fabric manipulation. The eradication of the brow, a fashionable blank canvas. In medieval Europe, eyebrows were not simply underappreciated, they were actively eradicated. While modern trends celebrate bold, feathered arches and elaborate brow tutorials, the 14th and 15th centuries considered eyebrows to be superfluous facial adornments. To achieve the desired aesthetic, women meticulously plucked their eyebrows into near invisibility or removed them entirely. The rationale was simple. A bare, smooth forehead symbolized elegance and refinement, and any natural hair growth was seen as an unwelcome interruption to this ideal. Eyebrows were, in essence, perceived as stubborn weeds marring the pristine garden of the face. Some individuals went further, completely shaving the brow area to ensure no stray strand compromised their alabaster, high-domed splendor. This level of commitment would undoubtedly astonish contemporary beauty influencers. primarily due to the absence of brow pencils for subsequent recreation. For brow removal, medieval women employed tweezers, wax, pumice stones, or, for the particularly audacious, concoctions containing quicklime, vinegar, or arsenic. Yes, arsenic. A testament to dedication indeed, even if it risked mild facial disfigurement. This was more than a fleeting fad. Art from the period, including illuminated manuscripts and oil portraits, consistently illustrates this trend. Noble women are frequently depicted with unblemished foreheads and serene, almost expressionless eyes framed solely by skin. The visual impact ranges from tranquil to slightly otherworldly, depending on the ambient light. Interestingly, this no-brow trend was not entirely universal. In certain regions of Europe, thin or lightly arched brows persisted, particularly influenced by cultural exchanges with the Middle East and Byzantine Empire through trade and conflict. However, the overarching message remained clear. Visible eyebrows were a sartorial misstep. This dictate wasn't exclusive to women. Men, especially those closely associated with court life, occasionally trimmed or groomed their brows as part of a broader aesthetic of refinement, though complete removal was rare from males, unless perhaps following a particularly intense theological debate. Ultimately, medieval beauty ideals prioritized a curated, symbolic appearance over naturalism, often evoking an angelic quality, as angels in art are rarely depicted with brows. Coincidence? Perhaps, but it proved effective for them. The discreet blush, a risky art of subtlety. In the Middle Ages, a subtle flush of color on the cheeks was indeed desirable. Yet, like many aspects of medieval life, it was governed by strict social codes, inherent risks, and the lurking specter of damnation. The ideal was a gentle, almost imperceptible blush, akin to the faint flush induced by a mildly scandalous poem or a brief 30-second exposure to the outdoors. Critically, not long enough to acquire a tan, which was anathema. A delicate rose hue on the cheeks suggested youth, fertility, and a general robust constitution. All highly attractive attributes, particularly if maintained beyond the tender age of 28. But the key was discretion. One could not appear to be trying. The application of rouge was considered an act of vanity, a vice dangerously proximate to sin. The Church generally looked askance at women who deliberately colored their faces, unless, of course, they were of noble birth or engaged in the act with appropriate humility, a theological nuance still debated by scholars. Nevertheless, women found ways to improvise. Common blush ingredients included saffron, beetroot juice, crushed strawberries, mulberries, or even cochineal, a deep red pigment derived from crushed insects. Yes, insects, for beauty has always transcended squeamishness. Some individuals simply rubbed their cheeks to stimulate a natural flush, while others meticulously dabbed mixtures of red ochre or wine sediment, exercising extreme care to avoid detection by both zealous clergy and judgmental neighbors. For the affluent, rouge could be formulated from red lead or cinnabar, both profoundly toxic. Yet the prevailing logic was perhaps, I may perish young, but I shall do so with pink cheeks and social approbation. Rouge was typically applied using a cloth, fingers, or any convenient implement not recently employed for seasoning a stew. Access to mirrors was limited, compelling many women to rely on instinct, muscle memory, or the occasional candid maidservant. Naturally, if one's blush was too conspicuous, accusations of imitating prostitutes, or worse, of French courtiers, might ensue. The horror! The consistent objective was modest enhancement, never theatrical declaration. Should one receive a compliment on their glow, the expected response was a fervent denial, perhaps attributing the radiance to a brisk wind. Even nuns, on occasion, applied a discreet touch of rouge, purportedly only on feast days. For indeed, nothing quite says, "I serve the Lord," like a tastefully subtle dab of beetroot behind the cloister walls. The golden standard: hair ideals and marital concealment. In medieval Europe, if one's hair did not appear blessed by divine light, or, metaphorically, spirited from an angelic being, they began at a distinct disadvantage. Blonde hair, in particular, stood as the supreme medieval gold standard. It was inextricably linked with youth, beauty, virtue, and, for additional divine endorsement, the Virgin Mary was frequently depicted as blonde, notwithstanding geographical improbabilities. Radiance, not realism, held paramount importance. To be born blonde was to be considered blessed, often exempting one from mundane chores. However, natural blondness, especially in adulthood, was often fleeting. Consequently, medieval women took matters into their own hands and occasionally into cauldrons. Homemade hair lightening concoctions included saffron, chamomile, ash, honey, and lye. These mixtures were applied liberally, followed by prolonged exposure to sunlight, a method known as sun-basking. This process demanded the patience of a cloistered nun and the skin resilience of a salamander. Some recipes even incorporated urine, believed to aid in color lifting. The provenance of said urine was less regulated, but any source that imparted a celestial shimmer was deemed acceptable. Beauty, throughout history, has maintained a certain disquieting aspect. Hair texture also played a significant role. Loose, long, wavy locks were the epitome of elegance, ideally cascading down the back like a divine curtain. This luxurious display, however, was reserved exclusively for unmarried women. Upon marriage, one's golden trestles were mandatorily concealed beneath veils, nets, and elaborate head wraps. It appears that the moment "I do" was uttered, a woman's hair transformed into a matter of national security. For noble women, hair was frequently braided, twisted, or artfully arranged into intricate styles, particularly for courtly or religious events. These coiffures were often adorned with silk ribbons, beads, or intricate embroidery, serving as subtle reminders of one's elevated status, far removed from the necessity of shearing sheep. Men were not entirely excluded from hair considerations. While less strictly scrutinized, those with thick golden locks were frequently romanticized in poetry and art. Knights with flowing hair charging into battle embodied the medieval equivalent of shampoo commercials. In medieval Europe, hair was akin to a financial asset. Possessing it did not necessarily dictate its public display, unless, of course, the objective was matrimony, whereupon it became a strategic instrument. Unmarried women were encouraged to wear their hair long and unbound, symbolizing purity and innocence, though not excessively loose, unless one aspired to the ethereal forest maiden archetype, a look socially acceptable only for actual saints or those facing martyrdom.
The pinnacles of fashion, the hennin and male elegance. If medieval beauty adhered to one unspoken yet undeniable tenet, it was this: height equated to nobility. And we are not referring to literal stature. By the 15th century, women across Europe embraced a fashion trend that quite literally elevated their physical presence, the hennin. This iconic, towering, cone-shaped headwear, seemingly inspired by ecclesiastical spires, was far more than mere adornment. It functioned as a wearable social hierarchy. These remarkable hats could ascend to 2 feet or more, particularly among the French and Burgundian aristocracy. The greater the hennin's height, the higher the wearer's perceived status, and perhaps less conveniently, the more frequently they would collide with doorways. Typically crafted from exquisite silk, velvet, or brocade, hennins featured internal wireframes that provided their distinctive, almost aerodynamic silhouette. A delicate, sheer veil often cascaded from the apex, imparting the sense of movement, mystery, and a significant risk of catching fire from nearby candles. Accommodating one's hair beneath such a structure was an intricate art. Hair was meticulously braided and coiled into the cone, or in some cases, the hair around the forehead was entirely shaved, again prioritizing forehead exposure to ensure the hennin sat correctly. Comfort was conspicuously absent from the design brief. Yet hennins were not the sole manifestation of this vertical obsession. Some women favored heart-shaped escoffions, resembling 2 croissants affixed to either side of the head, or butterfly hennins, where veils fanned out like wings, splendid for dramatic effect, less so for inclement weather. Outside the aristocracy, most women adhered to simpler veils, linen caps, or circlets, which were less hazardous and less likely to be mistaken for a siege weapon. Clergy and conservative thinkers predictably expressed considerable disapproval, warning that such ostentation invited vanity, sin, and potentially chronic neck strain. Nevertheless, hennins remained highly popular among those who could afford them, mirroring the persistence of many extravagant yet impractical fashion trends throughout history. While men did not adopt towering cones, they had their own sartorial statements, including feathered caps, fur-trimmed hoods, and elongated, pointed shoes that could, arguably, double as fencing implements. The ideal form, demure and delicate figures. In medieval times, the ideal female physique was neither athletic, voluptuous, nor overtly toned. Instead, the objective was to present as delicate, demure, and perhaps perpetually recovering from a fainting spell. The preferred figure was slender, soft, and a sort of ethereal, as if sustained purely by honeyed water, courtly poetry, and perhaps a single fig. Medieval beauty manuals offered no counsel on building strength or endurance. The only anticipated physical exertion was the graceful lifting of a veil in a coquettish gesture, followed by a swift, averted gaze, and ideally a well-timed swoon. Crucially, this was not about appearing sickly, at least not overtly. The sweet spot lay between being too frail to carry a simple bucket and still possessing the fortitude to play a lute while seated. A graceful, willowy silhouette was intrinsically linked with nobility, for direct engagement with labor would inevitably result in broader shoulders, stronger arms, and the unfortunate acquisition of muscle tone. Emphasis was placed on a narrow waist, gentle curves, and an overarching aura of spiritual weariness. Dress waistlines were often cinched directly below the bust, an early precursor to the empire waist, to elongate the torso and foster the illusion of both height and fragility. When this illusion required further enhancement, tight lacing, while not yet the rigid corsetry of later eras, achieved similar results with tightly bound kirtles and cinctures. However, excessive thinness was also to be avoided. In periods of famine or plague, extreme emaciation served as an unmistakable red flag, signaling active illness or impending demise. A subtle hint of roundness, particularly in the face or hips, was considered indicative of health and fertility. Essentially, if one appeared capable of surviving winter while simultaneously inspiring poetic verses, they had achieved the ideal. Dietary advice from the era was predictably far from balanced. Beauty manuals recommended fare such as fennel for digestion, rose petals for breath, and wine for improving complexion. Protein, it seems, was permissible only if it arrived with feathers still attached. Men, conversely, were permitted a more substantial physique, characterized by broad shoulders, strong legs, and the capacity to wield a sword without toppling. Yet, even for men, nobility favored a lean frame with refined posture over overt brute strength. A nobleman did not slouch. He glided, often with a subtle air of disdain. And if a man happened to be naturally muscular, it was acceptable, provided he was never observed actively utilizing those muscles for labor. Engaging in warfare was commendable. Hauling barrels was not. Above all, the desired aesthetic was one of effortless grace. One was not meant to strive for attractiveness. Rather, one was simply born noble, and that inherent status alone was deemed intrinsically appealing, a medieval precursor to hot without trying, replacing gym memberships with inherited land and a falcon. The eloquence of eyes, silent communication in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, a woman's eyes served as her profound, silent conduit of power, the medieval equivalent of a flirtatious emoji imbued with deeper spiritual implications and markedly less blinking. The quintessential medieval eyes were large, clear, and soulful, possessing an almost melancholic depth that seemed to whisper of virtue and quiet introspection. Imagine eyes that conveyed an almost personal witness to profound historical events, gently recovering from the weight of such observation. Poets of the era were captivated, describing them as luminous orbs, dewdrops of heaven, or pools of pure devotion. Conspicuously absent from such descriptions were terms like bloodshot, allergy-ridden, or up all night churning butter. Light-colored eyes, blue or gray, were frequently idealized in Northern Europe, symbolizing innocence, purity, and a presumption of having remained unburdened by disturbing sights, or at least maintaining a convincing pretense. In southeastern Europe, darker eyes also commanded admiration, particularly when paired with distinguished lineage and a substantial dowry. Enhancing the eyes presented considerable challenges due to limited cosmetic resources. Medieval women lacked modern eyeliner pens, relying on rudimentary charcoal, soot, and sheer optimism. Some cautiously dabbed a small amount of black powder around the lashes to create an illusion of larger eyes, risking irritation, blurred vision, or the accidental invention of the world's first smoky eye. Predominantly, women relied on natural attributes and strategic lighting. To appear wide-eyed, one might position oneself near a candle. To project virtue, a continuous downward gaze was employed, even at the risk of tripping over a feline. Intriguingly, slightly tear-rimmed eyes were often admired, suggesting emotional sensitivity, piety, and perhaps the recent conclusion of prayer or engagement with uplifting literature, such as a lengthy poem on chastity. While artificial tears were unavailable, sustained exposure to smoke or the enduring of mild public humiliation frequently achieved the desired effect. Regarding eye contact, it was a delicate social choreography. Excessive direct gaze could be perceived as bold, overtly flirtatious, or suspiciously French. Conversely, insufficient eye contact risked an impression of shiftiness or even possession. The practiced technique involved occasional brief glances from under lowered lids, conveying an individual intimately familiar with sacred texts, yet disinclined to boast.
Olfactory realities and the demure smile. Medieval dental aesthetics. Let us address a subject seldom immortalized in medieval love poetry: breath, specifically its fragrance. While a knight might rhapsodize about his lady's rosebud lips or pearl-like teeth, he typically omitted any mention of what transpired when those lips parted. This oversight stemmed from the fact that medieval dental hygiene remained, at best, an aspirational concept, and the invention of minty freshness lay centuries in the future, unless one considers the hopeful proximity to a herb garden. Nevertheless, fresh breath was technically considered desirable. A gentle, sweet-smelling mouth hinted at youth, good health, and the improbable notion that one had not consumed garlic and eels for breakfast, though, statistically, they very likely had. Medieval women employed various methods to mitigate oral odors. They chewed parsley, fennel seeds, cloves, cinnamon sticks, and occasionally twigs, not merely for flavor, but to maintain a tolerable oral environment. Consider these the pre-mint predecessors to modern chewing gum. While they may not have polished teeth, they rendered one marginally more kissable, or at least less formidable in close conversation. For those with access to apothecaries, herbal pastes and mouth rinses formulated from sage, vinegar, and myrrh were available. These were applied sparingly, owing to both their cost and the social impropriety of opening one's mouth too widely in public. Toothbrushing, as we understand it, was not standard practice. Instead, individuals cleaned their teeth with cloths, rubbed them with chalk or crushed herbs, or utilized chew sticks, small fibrous twigs that served as both abrasive cleaners and convenient fidget devices during tedious recitations of bad poetry by suitors. While halitosis was hardly romantic, it was not considered shocking. After all, everyone suffered from it to some degree, and medieval society faced more pressing concerns such as surviving winter or avoiding accusations of heresy. For noble women, the strategy revolved around minimizing offense while maintaining grace. Conversations transpired at a respectful arm's length. Public displays of affection were limited, and, when in doubt, a gentle fanning motion coupled with a contemplative expression was advised. Extra credit was awarded for carrying a small pomander, a scented orb filled with fragrant herbs to discreetly wave in one's own direction as needed. In contemporary society, a radiant smile can launch countless dating app interactions. In the Middle Ages, however, a smile was a risky undertaking, best deployed sparingly, akin to precious spices or peasant revolts. The fundamental reason: medieval dental hygiene was far from flourishing. While teeth held importance for chewing bread, their role in charming suitors was secondary. Most individuals possessed teeth ranging from slightly questionable to actively terrifying, particularly by the age of 30. Consequently, the less they were displayed, the better. This aesthetic preference was not entirely due to neglect. Tooth decay was rampant, a consequence of diets heavy in bread, porridge, and meat, and a complete absence of toothbrushes, dental floss, or any form of fluoride. Although sugar was not yet widely consumed in most Europe, even basic starches contributed to tooth degradation. Furthermore, dental surgery at the time largely resembled an exorcism performed with pliers. Despite these challenges, a healthy smile was quietly admired, though certainly not loudly celebrated. White, evenly spaced teeth were rare, seen as a mark of youth, fortune, and possibly divine intervention.
Yet, medieval individuals were not prone to flashing broad, toothy grins reminiscent of modern toothpaste advertisements. Indeed, a demure, closed-lipped smile was far more fashionable, conveying contemplative thought rather than unbridled enthusiasm. Some women even employed powders made from sage, salt, or ground coral in an attempt to clean or whiten their teeth. These methods offered mild effectiveness and were primarily abrasive. Imagine brushing with sand and hoping for the best. Overall, teeth were tolerated, not flaunted. Medieval art, for instance, almost never depicts open-mouthed smiles. Even saints and angels typically keep their mouths politely closed, as if they too were subtly aware of the risks of full dental disclosure. Men were not immune to these considerations. A knight might capture a lady's heart with his bravery and chiseled jawline, but no ballad ever included the line, "His molars gleamed like ivory." There is a clear reason troubadours sang of eyes, hair, and hands, not breath and bite alignment. The aristocratic male ideal, controlled strength and effortless nobility. When examining medieval beauty standards for men, the expectations were remarkably specific. The ideal male figure was not that of a Greek statue, nor did it resemble someone recently dislodged from a haycart. The optimal aesthetic lay somewhere between prepared to joust and capable of composing a poem about jousting without actually engaging in it. The quintessential medieval man was tall, lean, broad-shouldered, and crucially, radiated an air of noble unconcern. Excessive musculature suggested manual labor, while softness implied idleness or overindulgence in mead. The goal was to convey the ability to wield a sword, but only if the squire happened to be occupied. A defined jawline, prominent cheekbones, and a straight nose were universally considered attractive, evoking the image of a prince from an illuminated manuscript rather than a village strongman. A well-groomed beard or a clean-shaven face was acceptable, depending on the specific region and historical era, but either choice demanded a deliberate, cultivated appearance, not the look of someone recently lost in the wilderness for a week. Hair was typically shoulder-length and styled, especially for noblemen. Curls were highly fashionable in many courts, particularly if they appeared natural or could be artfully enhanced. Indeed, some men even employed curling irons, small heated rods or herbal rinses to enhance texture and shine. For nothing says "I am above manual labor" like dedicating 45 minutes to your page boy styling your fringe. Clothing played a pivotal role in refining the male silhouette. Padded shoulders, cinched waists, and fitted tunics accentuated the desired body shape, with an overarching emphasis on posture. A nobleman did not slouch, he glided, often with a subtle hint of disdain. Should a man possess natural musculature, it was perfectly acceptable, provided he was not observed actively working those muscles. Engaging in warfare was commendable. Hauling barrels was decidedly not. Above all, the desired impression was effortlessness. One was not supposed to try to be attractive. Rather, one was simply born noble, and that inherent nobility alone conferred appeal. A medieval form of effortless charm, substituting gym memberships for inherited land and a falcon. The art of medieval scent management, from pomanders to dry baths. In an era where personal bathing was often optional and sophisticated plumbing remained largely a Latin-named dream, scent management evolved into a complex art form. This was not the glamorous Chanel No. 5 infused artistry of modern times, but rather a more rudimentary, reactive approach. To be fair, people did bathe, though the frequency varied considerably based on the century, geographical location, and prevalence of plague. Therefore, to mitigate offense to both human and divine nostrils, medieval men and women turned to the prophylactic power of herbs, oils, and perfumes hatches. Let us commence with the pomander, a small, hollow metal sphere worn on a chain or pinned to clothing, filled with intensely aromatic herbs such as cloves, rosemary, cinnamon, sage, and occasionally something ominously labeled powder of roses. These were not merely elegant accessories, they served as portable olfactory shields, akin to carrying a personal air freshener. The nobility also favored perfumed gloves, handkerchiefs, and even scented combs. Every imaginable item was a candidate for aroma enhancement, including hair, which was sometimes dusted with floral waters or vinegar infusions that possessed a marginally more agreeable scent than sweat and desperation. Speaking of sweat, medieval garments were heavy, summers were hot, and deodorants were still centuries away. The solution was layers of linen, which effectively absorbed sweat-purification and could be laundered more frequently than the heavier woolen or silk outer garments. Some added herbal sachets to their underlayers, optimistically attempting to counter body odor with fragrant optimism. Bathhouses existed, particularly during the early and late medieval periods, but accessibility varied widely. The church in time discouraged communal nudity, which significantly curtailed enthusiasm for public hygiene. Consequently, many resorted to dry bathing, an unrefreshing practice involving wiping oneself with a cloth, spritzing on scented water, and pretending it sufficed. And then there were the overachievers, individuals who placed flower petals in their shoes or stuffed herbs into their bed linens, striving to emanate the faint, pleasant aroma of someone who had recently encountered a garden.
Beauty's moral compass, virtue, vanity, and social peril. In medieval Europe, beauty was not merely skin deep, it was profoundly morally loaded. A well-composed face could be perceived as a divine blessing, a potent social weapon, or even a snare laid by the devil himself. Sometimes all three before breakfast. To be beautiful was to navigate an exceptionally precarious path. On one hand, physical beauty, clear skin, symmetrical features, a pale complexion, was often interpreted as a sign of virtue. To be lovely implied divine favor, perhaps even being chosen by God, or, at the very least, an unlikelihood of sheep theft. Poets, preachers, and painters alike depicted beauty as tangible evidence of a pure soul. However, there was a critical caveat. To acknowledge one's own beauty, or worse, to leverage it for personal gain, immediately rendered one suspect. Vanity was a cardinal sin, and an overt interest in one's appearance hinted at pride, seduction, or, most alarmingly, French inclinations. Medieval sermons frequently warned that a woman's beauty could tempt men into sin, a transgression, of course, entirely attributable to the woman. Eve had established the precedent, and medieval Europe faithfully adhered to it for a millennium. A woman adorned with makeup, displaying a hint of hair, or fluttering her lashes at the wrong suitor, could readily find herself accused of everything from immorality to outright demonic influence. Some even believed that beauty could be an illusion, a sorceress's disguise, a glamour conjured by witches to lead righteous men astray. While this may sound theatrical, remember that this was an era when unfavorable weather could lead to accusations of witchcraft and execution. Conversely, those considered plain or ill-featured were sometimes presumed to be morally deficient or simply unfortunate. The notion that outward appearance directly reflected inner character was not merely popular. In some circles, it was doctrine. Beauty signified grace. Ugliness implied punishment, illness, or divine displeasure. Naturally, this created a remarkably confusing social landscape. Be beautiful, but not too diligently. Glow with virtue, but not so intensely that it smacks of pride. And above all, never appear more attractive than the local lord's wife, a direct route to a silent convent or surprisingly convenient illness. Thus, medieval beauty standards ultimately transcended mere aesthetics. They represented a complex moral tightrope walk, balancing vanity, virtue, and whatever powdered lead remained in one's cosmetic kit. The Persian Immortals, an imperial legend of unyielding might.
The Persian immortals were far more than an elite military unit. They were a living embodiment of imperial strength, unwavering precision, and perpetual continuity. Their lineage traces back to the very genesis of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE. During a period when Persia was rapidly expanding from a regional power into an expansive imperial juggernaut, Cyrus acutely recognized a vital truth. An empire requires a backbone, not merely administrators and governors, but an elite force capable of projecting dominance, inspiring loyalty, and quelling rebellion with equal efficacy. Thus, the immortals were conceived. The appellation Immortals was not mere royal embellishment. It was a stroke of logistical and psychological genius. According to Herodotus, their strength was perpetually maintained at precisely 10,000 men. If a single soldier perished, fell ill, or was wounded, a replacement was instantly dispatched. Their numbers never faltered. To external observers, it appeared they could not be diminished, could not be weakened, and crucially, could not die. Whether myth or brilliant logistical management, the image endured, and the name became legend. Immortality in this context was not about individual survival, but about the eternal presence of Persian power. These men were not random conscripts. To be an immortal meant selection from among the Persian nobility or from families of high status and proven loyalty. Training commenced in youth, discipline was brutal, and loyalty to the king was absolute. They were expected to be more than just warriors. They were exemplars of Achaemenid values: order, obedience, and composure under immense pressure. Their attire was as calculated as their tactics. Richly embroidered robes of fine materials, scale armor concealed beneath, and typically armed with a spear, bow, short sword, and a wicker shield. Persian kings deployed not just warriors, but a mobile political message encased in silk and steel. From the plains of Lydia to the deserts of Egypt, wherever the Persian Empire expanded, the immortals followed. They stood behind kings, beside thrones, and at the forefront of battle. To witness their approach was to behold not just warriors, but the unbroken heartbeat of an empire. Immortals did not flinch. Immortals did not retreat. Immortals endured. This unyielding resolve made them truly terrifying. The calculated spectacle, the immortals' visual warfare. The appearance of the Persian immortals was no accident. It was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. Unlike Greek hoplites, who were encased head to toe in gleaming bronze, the immortals presented an otherworldly visage, resembling a silent wave of richly adorned shadows sweeping across the landscape. Their uniforms seamlessly blended regal splendor with military function. They wore elaborately embroidered tunics and trousers, often dyed in rich reds and purples, colors synonymous with nobility and command. Beneath these garments lay a layer of scale armor, typically crafted from bronze or iron, offering flexibility for movement, yet deadly in close combat. Their shields, woven from wicker, were deceptively light, yet capable of deflecting arrows and absorbing blows. Their most distinctive feature, however, was their headdress, a soft felt cap called a tiara, sometimes pulled over the face to obscure individual identity. Unlike the Greeks, who glorified individuality in armor and valor, the immortals thrived on unwavering uniformity. 10,000 men moving in near silence, all identically armed and armored, created a visual spectacle that overwhelmed the senses. It was akin to witnessing a curtain of death descending upon the battlefield. Each immortal carried a short spear, a bow with a quiver of arrows, and a short sword or dagger. Yet perhaps their most impressive attribute was their capacity for rapid movement and lethal effectiveness across nearly any terrain. Their rigorous training emphasized agility and endurance over brute strength. They could march across entire provinces without breaking formation, and unlike many ancient armies, the Immortals were equally adept at open battle and serving as imperial guards in royal courts. Their equipment was light enough to ensure swift deployment, yet potent enough to intimidate and destroy. Their power was derived not from brute force, but from consistency, never faltering, never staggering, and never appearing vulnerable. This consistency, coupled with the enigmatic nature of their appearance, forged their enduring legend.
A life of unyielding duty. The Immortals' existence. To be an Immortal was not merely a military assignment, it was a lifelong identity, a profound status symbol, and, in many respects, a sentence. While they were revered and handsomely rewarded, the expectations placed upon them were immense. These men lived under relentless scrutiny. Their food, clothing, and housing were meticulously provided by the state, not out of benevolence, but to ensure absolute control. From the moment they entered the ranks, their allegiance belonged not to their families, but entirely to the empire. Most Immortals originated from Persian, Median, or Elamite nobility. Those sons of loyal families from lower ranks could ascend if they demonstrated exceptional discipline. Training commenced in childhood, often within military academies directly associated with the royal court. Young boys were rigorously instructed in horseback archery, endurance of pain and hunger, synchronized marching, and, most critically, unquestioning obedience. There was no allowance for glory-seeking or individual ambition. An Immortal who stood out too prominently was swiftly corrected. The formation was sacred. Unity superseded all else. Discipline permeated every facet of their lives. They adhered to a strict daily routine, awakening before dawn, silent drills, meticulous weapon and armor maintenance. Meals were communal, always modest, and precisely calculated for sustained endurance. Meat, flatbread, dates, and wine constituted their staples, but luxuries were actively discouraged. The empire demanded warriors, not pampered aristocrats. When not on campaign, the Immortals served as elite guards for the king and his court. Even then, their duties extended beyond ceremonial functions. They vigilantly guarded against assassination attempts, monitored nobles for signs of disloyalty, and maintained order in the empire's most volatile environments. Their mere presence could quell dissent in a royal hall. They functioned as the eyes and ears of the Achaemenid ruler, trained to detect deception, sense fear, and act with decisive efficiency. Intriguingly, they were not entirely isolated from family life. Immortals were permitted to marry and maintain households. However, they could be summoned at a moment's notice. When duty called, they relinquished everything without question. A man who hesitated, even for an instant, could be silently replaced. After all, the sacred number of 10,000 had to remain unbroken, with no gaps or delays. It was this cold, efficient system that perpetuated their mythos. They fought not just with discipline, but lived in discipline. They were instruments of empire, honed, polished, and sharpened until nothing remained but their unwavering duty. Darius the Great, the architect of immortal perfection. If Cyrus the Great conceived the Immortals, it was Darius the Great who brought them to unparalleled perfection. Upon Darius's ascension to power in 522 BCE, amidst courtly intrigue and assassination, the Immortals became the crucial instrument he employed to legitimize and stabilize his reign. They transcended their role as mere personal guards. They became a direct extension of royal authority, intricately woven into the expanding fabric of his imperial bureaucracy.
Darius profoundly understood that power resided not solely in military might, but in the illusion of order and inevitability. Nothing projected this image more effectively than the immortals. He showcased them in grand parades at festivals, stationed them prominently around his new capital of Persepolis, and dispatched them on high-profile diplomatic missions. They were perpetually visible, perpetually composed, perpetually the same 10,000 eternal faces of Persian dominance. Darius also meticulously redefined their tactical role. Under Darius's leadership, the immortals transformed into a core element of Persian combined arms warfare. No longer simply elite infantry, they were frequently deployed alongside archers, cavalry, and chariotry in meticulously coordinated strikes. Darius placed immense value on strategic flexibility, compelling the immortals to adapt. They underwent more rigorous training in ranged combat, siege warfare, and complex battlefield coordination. Reports from later Greek observers describe their terrifying efficiency, firing volleys of arrows while slowly advancing behind their wicker shields, never once breaking formation. They also became deeply involved in the suppression of rebellions. Darius's vast empire spanned from Egypt to the Indus Valley, and revolts were a constant threat. The immortals frequently served as the first wave of retaliation in regions like Elam, Babylon, and Scythia, acting as both swift punishment and a clear message. The empire is vigilant, and the king's will is inexhaustible. It was under Darius that they acquired a darker reputation, evolving from mere elite warriors into instruments of fear and retribution. Even their iconography was elevated. Carvings at Persepolis depict them in perfect, stylized, identical lines facing eternity in stone. These were not mere portraits, they were powerful propaganda. Darius intended for every subject and visitor to grasp a singular truth. These men are always here, always armed, and they do not die. Step out of line, and you will face 1 or 10,000. Through Darius, the immortals transcended their military unit status, becoming institutionalized fear, meticulously woven into the royal image, deployed with surgical precision, and veiled in gold-threaded silence. Thermopylae, the immortals' myth, challenged. The Persian immortals reached the zenith of their legend during the reign of Xerxes the Great. Nowhere was their formidable reputation more fiercely tested than at the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. This battle, now enshrined in centuries of art and cinema, was not merely a clash of armies, it was a symbolic collision between two fundamentally disparate worldviews: Persian imperial order versus Greek city-state defiance. At the epicenter of this storm stood the immortals. When Xerxes invaded Greece with what ancient sources claimed was the largest army the world had ever seen, he brought the immortals as his personal vanguard. They served not only as his protectors, but as a surgical instrument in the heart of chaos. Their fearsome reputation preceded them. The Greeks had heard tales of the 10,000 who never died, the elite troops who served kings like gods and fought with flawless precision. At Thermopylae, however, they encountered a resistance that profoundly rattled their mythos. King Leonidas and his few thousand Greeks, most famously the 300 Spartans, held the narrow pass against wave after wave of relentless Persian assaults. On the second day of battle, Xerxes commanded the immortals to breach the Greek line. It was intended as a decisive blow, for these were, after all, the elite of the elite. Yet what ensued was not the swift rout Xerxes anticipated. The immortals, despite their exceptional skill, were severely constrained by the tight geography of the pass. Their bows proved nearly useless in such confined quarters, and their shorter spears could not reach past the formidable extended dories of the Greek hoplites. For hours they clashed with the disciplined Spartans, who fought in tight interlocking phalanxes,
trained from childhood for precisely this form of combat. The immortals suffered heavy losses. Herodotus noted, perhaps with a degree of schadenfreude, that they were no more successful than the ordinary Persian troops. This was more than a military setback. It was a rupture in their carefully cultivated image. The immortals had always seemed untouchable, veritable gods of war clad in silk and scale. But at Thermopylae, they bled. They died. And for the first time, the illusion of their immortality cracked under the weight of Spartan spears and Greek defiance. But even in defeat, their resilience remained terrifying. They adapted, they regrouped, and they marched again. Immortality, ultimately, was not about invincibility. It was about unyielding endurance.
The immortal system, bureaucracy, as unending might. The most captivating aspect of the Persian immortals transcended their training or battlefield tactics. It was their system. What truly rendered them immortal was not magic or divine favor, but an incredibly efficient, relentless bureaucracy. When an immortal fell, whether in battle, due to illness, or through retirement, another seamlessly took his place, instantly. There was no mourning, no elaborate ceremony, simply a flawless substitution. The total number always remained precisely 10,000. This was not a poetic exaggeration, it was a deliberate design. The Achaemenid Empire functioned on logistical precision, and the immortals were its prime exemplars. They maintained a continuously replenished pool of trainees and understudies, young men meticulously groomed to fill vacancies the moment they arose. These replacements were stationed in the capital, rigorously supervised, drilled, and rotated through lesser duties until summoned for active service. This sophisticated internal structure transformed the immortals from a static elite unit into a living system of excellence, perpetually regenerating and evolving. To facilitate this, records were kept with meticulous care. Officers, known as Hazarapatis, literally commander of 1,000, oversaw recruitment, discipline, and supply. There were 10 such commanders beneath the overall leader of the immortals, supported by an intricate web of subcommanders, scribes, and quartermasters, who ensured every man possessed the correct arms, rations, lodging, and medical support. If a man was lost in Egypt, his replacement was immediately dispatched from Susa. If a soldier broke a leg during patrol in Media, his successor was already packing his gear. This intricate machinery extended beyond mere military readiness. It was also profoundly psychological. The illusion of 10,000 unchanging warriors served as a potent instrument of imperial terror. If one was slain, another instantly stepped into his place. The individual identity was irrelevant, the presence was eternal. Like a hydra of discipline and silk, the immortals projected an illusion of unstoppable force because the machine never paused for grief. Even off the battlefield, this system operated flawlessly. If an immortal's family demonstrated disloyalty or became politically compromised, he was quietly removed and replaced, without scandal or drama. The line advanced as if nothing had changed. This mechanism, profoundly alien to the glory-seeking ethos of the Greeks, was arguably the immortals' greatest strength, not individual skill or courage, but the cold, unwavering certainty that they could never truly vanish. Ambassadors in armor, the immortals' diplomatic role. While the Persian immortals are predominantly remembered as formidable warriors, they also served a far more subtle function. They were diplomats in armor. In the Achaemenid worldview, military force was not solely about conquest, it was equally about presence. The immortals were frequently deployed not merely to engage in combat, but to be seen, to enter foreign courts as living embodiments of Persian elegance and power. Their silken robes, gilded weaponry, and flawless discipline rendered them terrifying in battle, yet mesmerizing in times of peace.
When ambassadors arrived in foreign lands, the immortals often accompanied them, not primarily for protection, but as a spectacle. Imagine a small, elite escort entering a Greek or Babylonian city. 10 men, perfectly synchronized, clad not in crude leather or blood-stained bronze, but in fine tunics laced with gold, silent and inscrutable behind their soft, felt headdresses. They did not shout or issue threats. They had no need to. Their very existence was a negotiation. In satrapies, provinces, immortals were regularly stationed to subtly remind local governors of the true locus of power. They rarely interfered directly with civil administration, but their constant, vigilant presence served as a palpable warning. A mere whisper of sedition could bring a squad of immortals to a governor's door. Rebellions in the provinces were often preempted simply because the alternative, facing the immortals, was too dreadful to contemplate. Even within the royal court, their presence served multiple functions. They acted as ceremonial guards during Nowruz festivals, coronations, and diplomatic receptions. However, behind the opulent scenes, they meticulously monitored courtiers, detected treason, and enforced the king's will with silent efficiency. Some historians posit that they functioned almost as an internal intelligence agency, an ever-present reminder that loyalty was not an option. This dual identity, warrior and envoy, enforcer and ornament, was integral to their genius. Unlike most elite units of ancient times, which lived solely for the glory of battle, the immortals served a far broader imperial strategy. Warfare was merely one tool. Theirs was an empire sustained not solely by swords, but by symbols. The immortals understood that fear and awe are intrinsically linked. In foreign courts and remote palaces, their arrival conveyed a clear message. The king observes. The empire is eternal. Resistance is not worth the cost. In this manner, they fought wars without ever unsheathing a blade. The erosion of invincibility and enduring legacy. All empires eventually wane, and so too do their legends. By the later years of the Achaemenid Empire, the immortals, while still feared and respected, were no longer truly invincible. The intricate machinery that had once ensured their immortality gradually began to rust, not through a dramatic collapse, but through a creeping, insidious inefficiency. As Persian kings grew increasingly detached from the rigors of the battlefield, becoming more engrossed in courtly luxuries and intrigues, the immortals too began to transform from hardened warriors into royal ornaments. Under monarchs like Artaxerxes and Darius III, the elite guard persisted, still impeccably uniformed, still marching in perfect formation. But subtle cracks had emerged. Recruitment standards slipped, and political favoritism began to insinuate itself into their venerable ranks. Whereas once only the most disciplined and loyal men were selected, now nobles pulled strings to place unworthy sons into the venerable 10,000. The outcome was subtle, but ultimately fatal. Uniformity without spirit, discipline without heart. This decay was tragically evident when Alexander the Great launched his invasion of Persia in 334 BCE. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, the immortals were deployed alongside the Persian center to defend Darius III. Although they fought with commendable courage, they proved incapable of withstanding the tactical brilliance and relentless momentum of Alexander's Macedonian phalanx. They were outflanked, outmaneuvered, and ultimately overwhelmed. More devastatingly, the myth itself did not survive the battle. For centuries, the name Immortals had inspired profound awe, but Gaugamela proved they were no longer the formidable force they had been under Cyrus the Great or Xerxes I. The intricate machinery of instant replacement faltered. The robust backup system that had once rendered their losses invisible simply ceased to function effectively. The unit never recovered. When Alexander marched into Persepolis and seized the royal palace, he entered the shell of a crumbling empire. The immortals were not there to defend it. The unbroken line,
had at last been broken. Yet their story did not conclude with defeat. Elements of the immortals' legacy endured. Alexander himself incorporated Persian traditions into his army. Later, in the Sasanian Empire, a new elite force would emerge, sometimes referred to by historians as immortals once more. While not direct descendants of the Achaemenid unit, they embodied the same mission of imperial invincibility. Even in their fall, the immortals left an indelible blueprint. They had demonstrated to the world how to forge not merely an army, but a legend. The Persian immortals may have vanished from the battlefield, but their profound influence never dissipated. Long after the collapse of the Achaemenid Empire, the concept of an unbreakable elite fighting force remained firmly embedded in the imagination of generals, kings, and chroniclers. Their legend persisted not because they triumphed in every engagement, but because they represented a grander ideal, the perfection of state-controlled power, an army that defied age, questioned nothing, and never faltered. When the Greeks described them, it was with a curious blend of awe and suspicion. Herodotus termed them immortals, not because they were immune to death, but because they could not be seen to die. Their replacements were instantaneous, their presence eternal. To the Greeks, this was eerie, almost unnatural. Accustomed to warfare as a chaotic, personal affair, the immortals represented something altogether different, precise, faceless, disciplined to the very edge of humanity. In Roman times, scholars continued to reference the immortals,
Scythian Amazons, nomadic warriors of the steppe. Before the Greek legends of Amazons captivated the imagination, there were the Scythians, nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppe, both feared and respected from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains. Unlike most ancient societies, Scythian women were not confined to domestic duties, weaving cloth or raising children. They rode horses, wielded bows, and engaged in warfare. Crucially, they did not merely accompany men into battle, they led and fought with lethal proficiency. This was not an anomaly, it was an intrinsic aspect of their culture. Greek historians like Herodotus were astonished by these women, describing entire tribes where women refused to marry unless they had first killed an enemy in combat. Herodotus's accounts, initially dismissed as exotic curiosities, have since been substantiated by compelling archaeological evidence. Burial mounds, known as kurgans, scattered across Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and southern Russia, have yielded remarkable discoveries. The skeletons of young women interred with bows, arrows, swords, and even battle-inflicted injuries. One particularly poignant discovery revealed a woman with an arrowhead lodged in her spine, her body armored, her grave richly furnished. These were not ceremonial weapons. They had been used, and so had she. Scythian society fundamentally differed from its contemporaries. Life on the steppe demanded mobility and resilience. Every individual, male or female, had to ride, hunt, and defend the tribe. Girls learned archery from an age as young as boys. They wore identical leather trousers, identical armor. They even styled their hair and tattoos similarly, rendering them almost indistinguishable on horseback amidst a storm of arrows. This fostered a warrior culture where gender roles were fluid on the battlefield, but maintained off it. A Scythian woman could be a deadly force at full gallop, then return home to fulfill ritual and maternal duties. These two roles were not in conflict, they were complementary. While Greek myths of the Amazons may have been inspired by exaggerated encounters with Scythian women, the Amazons of myth receded into fantasy, whereas the Scythians were undeniably real. They fought Persians, clashed with Greeks, and instilled terror in the Macedonians. For centuries, men and women alike roamed the steppe with fire and fury. The Dahomey Amazons, West Africa's formidable female regiment. In the modest West African kingdom of Dahomey, located in modern-day Benin,
A formidable army of women once instilled profound fear in European colonizers, rival kingdoms, and anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. They were known as the Agoge, but the French, drawing a comparison to Greek mythology, famously dubbed them the Dahomey Amazons. These warriors were unequivocally real. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Agoge had become the standing royal guard of Dahomey's king. They were more than guards, they were an elite infantry, rigorously trained to kill, to defend, and to never retreat. Initially, their origins may trace back to elephant hunters or palace attendants, but over time, they evolved into a formal, highly feared military force. Recruited as young girls, often chosen for their inherent strength or spirited nature, the Agoge were separated from their families and subjected to intense training. Discipline was absolute. They navigated obstacle courses replete with thorns, sparred with live blades, and swore oaths of celibacy and unwavering loyalty to the king. They wore distinctive braided sashes and carried muskets, machetes, and clubs. However, their most potent weapon was psychological. 19th century European observers were consistently shocked by their fearlessness and brutal efficiency. One French officer noted with disquiet how a Dahomey Amazon would rush forward, swiftly sever a man's throat, and then calmly wipe her blade. These were not symbolic warriors. They were frontline shock troops, deployed in raids, pitched battles, and ambushes. During the Franco-Dahomean Wars in the 1890s, the Agoge engaged in direct combat with French colonial forces. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they launched audacious night raids, executed ambushes, and fought street by street to defend their kingdom. Their tenacity compelled French commanders to reevaluate their tactics and their preconceived notions about gender in combat. Yet it was not merely their battlefield success that defined them. The Dahomey Amazons existed within a profoundly patriarchal world, yet they carved out a space of complete autonomy and profound influence. They advised kings, performed crucial ceremonial duties, and shaped the kingdom's foreign policy, not from the shadows, but with blades in hand. Though the French ultimately defeated Dahomey, the legend of the Agoge never perished. In fact, their legacy served as inspiration for modern fictional warriors such as the Dora Milaje in Marvel's Black Panther. But truth, as always, proves more compelling than fiction. Tomo Gozen, Japan's lady samurai of legend and steel. Within the annals of Japan's medieval history, a singular figure rides through both blood and legend. Tomo Gozen, a samurai warrior of the late 12th century. She distinguished herself during the Genpei War, a brutal civil conflict between the Minamoto and Taira clans that ultimately ushered in the first shogunate. Tomo was not a symbolic figure or a passive consort. She was a commander, a swordswoman, and an archer, rigorously trained in the deadly arts of the battlefield and renowned for her precision in combat. Her story is most famously chronicled in the Tale of the Heike Monogatari, a war epic that seamlessly blends historical events with poetic flourish. In this chronicle, Tomo is described as exceptionally beautiful, with fair skin, long hair, and captivating features. However, the subsequent sentence delivers the impact. She was also a remarkably strong archer, and as a swordswoman, she was a warrior worth 1,000. Here, beauty and lethality were not contradictions, they were inextricably fused. Tomo served under Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a warlord and her probable lover, during his campaign to seize control of Kyoto. She was not a camp follower or a battlefield medic. She was immersed in the thick of combat, reportedly leading troops and even personally slaying multiple enemies in single engagements. At the Battle of Awazu in 1184, facing encirclement by rival Minamoto forces, Yoshinaka ordered his final stand.
Rather than retreat, Tomo chose to fight. In one of her most celebrated encounters, she is said to have dismounted a charging enemy horseman, wrestled him to the ground, and beheaded him on the spot, then calmly remounted and rejoined the chaos. This moment, possibly embellished, yet undeniably potent, has endured for centuries as a testament to her unparalleled composure and skill. What became of Tomo after the war remains shrouded in mystery. Some accounts suggest she was captured and compelled into marriage. Others claim she became a nun, retreating into silent contemplation. Still others believe she simply vanished, like a phantom, into the mists of legend. Regardless of the precise truth, the legacy of Tomo Gozen persevered in theater, folklore, and the national memory. In a society rigidly structured by gender roles and patriarchal control, Tomo Gozen stood apart, blade drawn, head held high, and utterly unafraid. She fought not merely for her lord, she fought for her very right to exist in a world that sought to deny her.
Boudica, Britannia's flame-haired queen of rebellion. In the 1st century CE, the Roman Empire stood at its zenith, disciplined, organized, and seemingly invincible. Yet from Britannia emerged Boudica, a flame-haired Celtic queen who nearly brought the colossal Roman machine to its knees. Her name would resonate through history as a potent symbol of raw vengeance, fierce national pride, and the terrifying force of a woman with nothing left to lose. Boudica was the wife of Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what is now eastern England. Prasutagus was a client king under Roman rule, permitted to retain power so long as he maintained peace. However, upon Prasutagus' death, Rome disregarded his will and moved to seize his lands outright. In the process, Roman officials publicly scourged Boudica and, according to the historian Tacitus, raped her daughters. It was a brutal humiliation intended to crush any nascent rebellion. Instead, it ignited a wildfire. In 60 or 61 CE, Boudica united several British tribes and launched one of the most ferocious revolts in Roman history. She was no mere figurehead. Roman accounts describe her leading her army from a chariot, spear in hand, clad in a flowing tunic and a massive gold torque around her neck. Her fiery red hair streamed behind her as she rallied her people to war. She was part priestess, part general, and entirely fury. Her forces descended upon Camulodunum, modern Colchester, burning it to the ground. Next came Londinium, the nascent London, where she systematically slaughtered Roman colonists and razed the city. Historians estimate that over 70,000 Romans and their sympathizers were killed within just a few months. Her army left a trail of ash and shattered Roman arrogance in their wake. However, the Romans, under Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, regrouped. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they lured Boudica into a decisive pitched battle where Roman discipline and formation tactics proved overwhelming. The rebellion was crushed. Boudica, facing inevitable defeat, is said to have taken poison rather than endure capture. Though her uprising ultimately failed, Boudica's legacy only grew. Roman historians, while depicting her as a barbarian, were compelled to acknowledge her extraordinary courage and leadership. For the British, particularly in later centuries, she became an enduring symbol of resistance against tyranny, both foreign and domestic. Kutulan, the Mongol princess who wrestled for her hand. In the war-torn steppes of Central Asia, during the zenith of Mongol expansion, emerged a woman who struck fear into seasoned warriors and embarrassed princes, not with a sword, but with sheer physical dominance. Her name was Kutulan, and she was the great-great-granddaughter of none other than Genghis Khan. Yet, She did not merely reside in his formidable shadow, she forged her own legend, one headlock at a time. Born around 1260 CE, Kutalin was the daughter of Kaidu Khan, a powerful cousin of Kublai Khan and a rival claimant to leadership within the Mongol Empire. Kutalin was raised akin to a warrior prince, rigorously trained in archery, horsemanship, and battlefield tactics. However, her most remarkable talent lay in wrestling, a deeply revered and intensely competitive sport among the Mongols. According to the Persian historian Rashid al-Din, Kutalin vowed she would only marry a man who could defeat her in a wrestling match. Many attempted. All failed. Dozens of suitors walked away defeated and humiliated, some even wagering horses, gold, or entire herds on their chances. It is said she amassed an astonishing 10,000 horses from her victories, transforming her not merely into a champion, but one of the wealthiest women on the steppe. Yet she was not merely toppling men for sport. She fought alongside her father in actual battles, commanding troops and decisively breaking enemy lines. During campaigns against both rival Mongol factions and Chinese forces, Kutalin was Kaidu's most trusted military advisor. He even contemplated naming her as his successor, an unprecedented move in a culture overwhelmingly dominated by male warlords. This naturally sparked considerable backlash, with some Mongol nobles whispering that her influence was unnatural, her power too threatening. Ultimately, Kaidu did not name her his heir, choosing a male relative instead. Nevertheless, her formidable reputation endured. Even Marco Polo, who traversed the Mongol Empire, documented encountering a Mongol princess who fought like a tiger and could ride and shoot as well as any man. Later historical accounts sometimes attempted to romanticize or diminish her, transforming her into a love-struck figure or reducing her story to mere legend. But make no mistake, Kutalin was real, and her strength was legendary. She unequivocally demonstrated that even in the heart of the most male-dominated empire on Earth, a woman could rise to unparalleled heights, not because she was permitted to, but because no one could stop her. Joan of Arc, France's Maid of Orleans. In an era when women were disenfranchised, legally restricted from land ownership, and even prohibited from wearing male attire without risking arrest, one French teenager not only donned armor, but led armies. Joan of Arc, born in 1412 in the humble village of Domremy, was an illiterate peasant girl. Yet by the age of 17, she would command troops, confront kings, and decisively alter the course of the 100 Years' War between France and England. Her improbable ascent stemmed not from military training or noble lineage. She claimed divine inspiration, asserting that she heard voices, those of Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret, who instructed her that she was chosen to expel the English from France and crown Charles the Dauphin as king. It was an audacious claim, one that should have led to her dismissal as mad. Instead, it secured her an audience with the future King Charles VII. The court subjected her to rigorous testing. Clergy interrogated her for weeks, yet she somehow prevailed. They perceived something inexplicable within her: conviction, charisma, an undeniable force. And so, clad in white armor, her banner flying high, Joan was dispatched to Orleans, a besieged city whose fate symbolized the war's turning point. French commanders remained skeptical. However, Joan's mere presence galvanized their spirits. She did not merely observe from the sidelines. She led charges, braved volleys of arrows, and rallied troops under heavy fire. Against all odds, the French lifted the siege. This victory electrified the nation. Joan became celebrated as the Maid of Orleans,
a powerful symbol of divine favor and patriotic resistance. Following a series of victories, she successfully escorted Charles to Reims, where he was crowned king, precisely as her voices had foretold. But power, fame, and miracles inevitably attract adversaries. In 1430, she was captured by Burgundian allies of the English. Tried by a pro-English ecclesiastical court, Joan was accused of heresy, witchcraft, and notably wearing male clothing, a capital crime. She was just 21 when she was burned alive in Rouen marketplace. Yet her tragic death only amplified her legend. Years later, the church reversed her conviction. Centuries later, she was canonized as a saint. Nakano Takeyu, the last Onna Bujiesha. By the time Nakano Takeyu took up her nagatana, a bladed polearm traditionally favored by samurai women, Japan was undergoing rapid transformation. It was the late 1860s, and the samurai class was being systematically dismantled as the nation embraced modernization. Yet, in one final defiant stand for the old ways, this young woman would etch her name into history as the last true Onna Bujiesha, a female warrior of the samurai tradition. Nakano was born in 1847 into a respected family of scholars and warriors. From a young age, she diligently studied Confucian classics, calligraphy, and crucially, martial arts. Her preferred weapon, the nagatana, was more than merely practical, it was symbolic. Traditionally employed by women of the samurai class, it allowed for extended reach and a fluid, graceful combat style. Under the tutelage of her adopted father and martial arts master, she trained until her skill rivaled
Lady Death of the Eastern Front. In the smoldering ruins of World War II, one name struck visceral fear into German soldiers on the Eastern Front: Ludmila Pavlichenko. Nicknamed Lady Death by her adversaries, she was not a myth, a morale booster, or a mere propaganda figure. She was a genuine force of nature. A Soviet sniper who achieved an astonishing 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers. She stands as the most lethal female sniper in recorded history. Born in 1916 in what is now Ukraine, Pavlichenko exhibited a competitive spirit from a young age. She was fiercely patriotic and possessed an innate talent for marksmanship. When Nazi Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, she was merely 24 years old and pursuing a history degree at university. However, instead of books, she took up a rifle and volunteered for the Red Army. Officials initially suggested she serve as a nurse, but she steadfastly refused, demanding a combat role, which she ultimately received. Deployed to the front lines during the siege of Odessa and subsequently the siege of Sevastopol, Pavlichenko earned her formidable reputation through arduous trials. She endured protracted hours, motionless and camouflaged in freezing terrain, patiently awaiting the perfect shot. Her targets extended beyond ordinary foot soldiers. She meticulously hunted officers, machine gunners, and rival snipers. She operated with nerves of steel, patience bordering on the supernatural, and an absolute, unyielding hatred for the invaders. Her kill count ascended so rapidly that she was eventually withdrawn from the front and dispatched on a diplomatic tour of the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. There, she met President Franklin D. Roosevelt and forged a notable friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who admired her composure and intellect. Pavlichenko delivered impassioned speeches, urging the Allies to open a second front in Europe, and deftly rebuffed reporters who posed sexist questions about her makeup and skirt length. After the war, she did not recede into obscurity. She completed her degree, became a historian, and dedicated herself to training future generations of Soviet snipers.
Although she suffered from war-related trauma and injuries, her legacy has endured. She was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal and remains a revered national hero in both Russia and Ukraine. In a world that often questions the role of women in warfare, Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko offered no arguments or protests. She simply executed her mission with unparalleled proficiency. The unwritten histories, unseen warrior women throughout history. For every celebrated name, Boudica, Tomoygozin, Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko, there exist countless others whose narratives have been lost or marginalized by mainstream historical accounts. History, after all, has predominantly been written by men. When women wielded swords, rifles, or spears, their contributions were frequently omitted, downplayed, or transformed into myth. Yet make no mistake, warrior women have been present throughout history, across continents and centuries, and their silence was never voluntary. Consider the Trung sisters of Vietnam, Trung Trac and Trung Nhi, who spearheaded a rebellion against Chinese occupation in the 1st century CE. They rode elephants into battle, rallied thousands of followers, and governed an independent state for 3 years before succumbing to superior Chinese forces. Their tenacious resistance is still commemorated today with temples and festivals in their honor, despite their infrequent mention in global history textbooks. Similarly, Ya Asantewete of the Ashanti Empire in West Africa in 1900 led a formidable rebellion against British colonial forces. As Queen Mother, she galvanized her people when the British demanded the sacred golden stool, the paramount symbol of Ashanti sovereignty. She delivered fiery speeches and personally led her troops into battle, unequivocally demonstrating that leadership and defiance transcended gender. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests the presence of Viking shield maidens, though perhaps not as widespread as romanticized legends suggest. Archaeological finds consistently confirm that women were interred with weapons, armor, and even war horses, not as ceremonial tokens, but as active warriors. In the American Southwest, Apache women fighters like Lozin, a spiritual warrior, rode and fought alongside her brother, the renowned leader Victorio. In every era, across every region, warrior women engaged in combat, not always to conquer, but to protect, to defend their families, their cultures, and their homes. Some commanded armies, others fought as solitary figures in resistance movements. Some were queens, some were peasants. But all of them shattered the fallacy that war was exclusively the domain of men. Today, their collective legacy is undergoing a vital reclamation. From rigorous scholarly research to compelling pop culture representations, the stories of these extraordinary women are finally re-emerging. Each rediscovered name serves as a poignant reminder that history is not merely what was documented, but also what was deliberately erased. These women did not demand remembrance, they demanded respect. And slowly, the world is beginning to heed their call. Ancient harmonies, the foundational sounds of civilization. In the venerable heart of ancient Mesopotamia, a region encompassing modern-day Iraq, music transcended mere entertainment. It was ritual, power, and language itself. No instrument embodied this more profoundly than the lyre. Among the world's earliest stringed instruments, the Mesopotamian lyre dates back over 4,500 years, emerging from the Sumerian city of Ur, where music was intricately woven into both solemn temple ceremonies and vibrant royal court life. The lyres of Ur were not simple wooden harps. They were exquisitely crafted objects, frequently adorned with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and intricate animal motifs. One of the most celebrated examples is the bull-headed lyre, discovered in a royal tomb in the 1920s by Sir Leonard Woolley. Its soundbox was shaped like a bull's body, and the instrument's head, covered in gold leaf, featured a beard fashioned from lapis lazuli. This ornamentation was not purely aesthetic. The bull symbolized strength, and its presence on a lyre likely held deep spiritual significance. Played with the fingers or a small plectrum, the lyre produced a resonant, haunting tone. While precise ancient melodies remain elusive, scholars believe the Sumerians used a heptanic scale, 7 notes, remarkably akin to modern Western music. Clay tablets inscribed with early musical notation offer tantalizing clues, demonstrating that music theory and scale construction were already developed in that distant era. These lyres were not confined to palatial halls. In temples, music accompanied offerings and prayers to the gods. Hymns were sung with lyre accompaniment in honor of deities such as Inanna and Enlil, transforming music into a sacred bridge between the human and the divine. In funerary rites, lyres mourned the deceased, aiding souls on their journey into the afterlife. They were not merely instruments, they were voices of transition and transformation. Mesopotamian musicians held respected positions in society, some serving as female priestesses, others as court performers. They memorized complex songs passed down orally, often commencing their training at a young age within structured schools for scribes and musicians. Today, replicas of these ancient lyres are played in museums and reconstructions, their soft, twanging echoes reminding us that long before Mozart, before medieval minstrels, or even Homer's sung epics, humans were plucking strings in the desert in pursuit of beauty and sound.
The Aeolus, ancient Greece's wild Dionysian voice. While the lyre gently serenaded the gods, the Aeolus screamed, wept, and danced through the very souls of the ancient Greeks. This reed-blown, double-piped wind instrument was no gentle flute. It was wild, emotional, and unrelenting. For the Greeks, music was not mere entertainment. It was ethos, a profound force that shaped the soul. And the Aeolus embodied its most primal essence. Unlike the lyre, which symbolized harmony and order and was favored by Apollo, the Aeolus was inextricably linked with Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and madness. It was frequently played during rituals, dramatic performances, and military marches, granting it a wide spectrum of emotional and functional applications. The Aeolus consisted of 2 pipes, typically crafted from wood, bone, or ivory, each fitted with its own reed and finger holes. The musician, or auletus, played both pipes simultaneously, producing a dense, penetrating sound closer to a bagpipe than a modern flute. This demanded extraordinary breath control. Auletus often employed a technique called circular breathing, inhaling through the nose while expelling air through puffed cheeks, allowing for continuous play. The exertion often distorted their faces and distended their cheeks, so much so that it leads sometimes ridiculed Auletus for their awkward appearance. And yet, despite the jesting, Auletus were revered in certain circles. The Aeolus was not intended for calm background music. It stirred the blood. In ancient Greek theater, it accompanied tragedies and comedies, infusing mood and momentum into the performances of Sophocles and Euripides. In battle, its blaring voice maintained the hoplites' marching cadence, slicing through the chaos. And during Bacchic rituals, it propelled dancers into trance-like states, blurring the line between performer and possessed. Plato himself held a complex relationship with the Aeolus. In his Republic, he famously dismissed it as excessively emotionally overwhelming, preferring instruments like the lyre and cithara for their intellectual clarity. Yet even he could not deny its potent power. The Aeolus could evoke sorrow, mimic fury, or incite euphoria, sometimes all within a single breath. Today, fragments of ancient Aeolus survive in museums, and modern reconstructions hint at their raw energy. Unlike the mathematically balanced lyre, the Aeolus was not about perfection. It was about release. It carried the sound of frenzy, mourning, seduction, and war. The guqin and the gujiang, philosophical strings of ancient China. In the ancient courts and scholarly studios of China, music transcended art. It was philosophy in motion. Few instruments embody this more profoundly than the guqin and the gujiang, two stringed zithers that resonated with the sounds of dynasties, meditation, and poetic introspection. While superficially similar, each played a distinct role in shaping China's rich musical identity. The guqin is the elder of the two, boasting over 3,000 years of history. With 7 strings and a long, fretless wooden body, it produced quiet, subtle tones. To the uninitiated ear, the guqin sounds might seem almost whisper-like. Gentle glides, ethereal harmonics, and plucked notes that echo like raindrops on ancient tiles. Yet for Chinese scholars and sages, these sounds mirrored the cosmic balance between heaven and earth. Confucius himself is said to have played the guqin, believing it cultivated moral character and inner harmony. In ancient China, learning the guqin was not about becoming a performer. It was about becoming civilized. Contrast this with the gujiang, a younger, louder cousin, with a brighter sound and a more public presence. Featuring 16 to 21 strings, or more in modern versions, the gujiang was designed for performance. Its curved wooden frame and movable bridges allowed for rich melodies and dramatic glissandos. Musicians plucked the strings with picks attached to their fingers, creating cascades of notes that shimmer like flowing water. It was favored in palaces, folk music, and even military camps. Where the guqin whispered to the soul, the gujiang sang to the crowd. Both instruments played vital roles in ritual and storytelling. The guqin frequently accompanied poetry readings, philosophical lectures, and meditation. The gujiang was employed in banquets, operas, and to recount historical epics. Its music could skillfully mimic galloping horses, flowing rivers, or weeping lovers, all through vibrating silk strings and masterful fingerwork. These instruments also represented gendered spaces in ancient China. The guqin was traditionally played by male scholars, while the gujiang became more closely associated with female performers, particularly in later dynasties. Nevertheless, both were deeply respected, taught in musical academies, and enshrined within the Confucian ideals of balanced education. Today, both the guqin and the gujiang continued to be played, enjoying a resurgence in both classical and contemporary settings. They remain living echoes of China's ancient soul, where music was not merely heard, but experienced as a path to virtue and profound emotional depth. The sacred sonics of ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, music was not mere background noise. It was a sacred tool, a profound form of divine communication that resonated through temples, tombs, and daily life. From pharaohs to peasants, music permeated every aspect of existence. It soothed laborers, honored the deceased, guided religious rituals, and entertained the living. The instruments that shaped this unique soundscape were as diverse as the Nile itself. One of the oldest and most iconic Egyptian instruments was the harp. Early harps, curved like bows, gradually evolved into larger angular harps that could stand as tall as a man. These instruments were plucked with the fingers frequently by temple musicians or court entertainers. Harps were not merely artistic tools. They held strong associations with the afterlife. Tomb paintings often depict harpists playing for the souls of the dead, facilitating their journey into eternity. Then came the sistrum, a sacred rattle intrinsically linked with the goddess Hathor, the patron of music, motherhood, and joy. Crafted from metal with loose crossbars, the sistrum produced a distinct jangling sound when shaken. It was not subtle, but its power was undeniable. Employed in temples to invoke deities, purify sacred spaces, and repel malevolent spirits, the rhythmic shaking of the sistrum was believed to appease the gods and maintain cosmic order. Flutes, frequently fashioned from reed or bone, added breathy melodies to processions and rituals. The double clarinet, with its 2 pipes played simultaneously, created a rich buzzing harmony, serving as a clear predecessor to the aeolus of Greece. Percussion was provided by frame drums, hand clappers, and even castanets, particularly prominent in dances and festivals. Professional musicians in Egypt occupied respected social positions. Many were women, depicted in ancient art as harpists and singers, often serving temples. These women were more than mere entertainers. They were chantresses of Ammon, musicians of Isis, figures wielding significant spiritual authority. Music served to honor deities, accompany offerings, and mark the profound transitions between life and death. Egyptian musical notation remains largely elusive. Unlike Mesopotamia or Greece, few specific musical records have survived. However, their instruments, vividly depicted in tombs and temples, offer invaluable insights. Ancient Egyptians understood music as a synthesis of structure, emotion, and magic. Even in death, music was deemed essential. Instruments were often interred with the elite, their owners believing they would play again in the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. To them, music was not a pastime. It was the very language of eternity.
The rhythmic heartbeat, ancient African drums and sound. Long before written words etched history onto stone, ancient African cultures employed a far more primal and immediate form of communication: rhythm. Across the vast continent, drums were not merely instruments, they were voices. They spoke, commanded, remembered, and summoned. In Africa's ancient societies, music, particularly percussion, was a living, breathing language that conveyed stories, laws, identities, and the very pulse of the divine. Drums varied widely by region and purpose. However, one of the most iconic was the talking drum, prevalent in West Africa. Shaped like an hourglass and strung with leather cords, this drum could precisely mimic the tonal languages of the people. Skilled drummers could speak entire phrases by adjusting the tension on the cords while striking the drum with a curved stick. Messages announcing births, deaths, warnings, or royal summons were transmitted across villages long before the advent of paper or postal systems. The drum effectively became the continent's first wireless communication network. Yet drums transcended mere practicality. They were profoundly spiritual. In kingdoms such as ancient Kush and Nok, drums summoned ancestors and deities. In Ithe and Benin, they honored kings and gods in elaborate court rituals. Drumming was central to initiation ceremonies, healing rituals, and funerals. It was believed that to strike a sacred drum was to awaken forces beyond the veil. African drums assumed countless forms: djembe, dondon, bugarabu, kidi, each with specific roles within the musical hierarchy. They were meticulously carved from single logs, carefully hollowed and fitted with animal hide, each tuned to a specific pitch or tone. The craftsmanship itself was sacred, passed down through generations, with rituals accompanying the very making of the instrument. And percussion did not cease with drums. Rattles, bells, shakers, and thumb pianos added intricate layers of rhythm and melody, creating complex, polyrhythmic soundscapes that Western music would only fully comprehend centuries later. In African tradition, music was inseparable from movement. One did not merely listen, one danced, breathed, and sweated with the rhythm. The drummer was not a mere performer. He was a conduit, channeling energy, spirit, and communal memory. These rhythms journeyed across the trans-Saharan trade routes, along the Nile, and later, tragically, through the Atlantic slave trade, profoundly shaping diasporic music from Brazil to the Caribbean. But their heart always remained in Africa, where the beat was not entertainment, it was identity, ancestry, and survival. The breath of the Andes, wind instruments of ancient civilizations. High in the Andes Mountains, where the air thins and clouds brush the earth, music resonated through stone cities and terraced fields, not from strings or drums, but from wind. Ancient Andean civilizations, such as the Nazca, Moche, and Inca, developed a rich musical tradition centered around aerophones, flutes, whistles, and most famously, panpipes, or sikus. The siku is a deceptively simple-looking instrument, multiple reeds or bamboo tubes of varying lengths lashed together in a row or stacked in double rows. Each tube produces a single note, and players alternate rapidly between rows to create melodies. The result is a haunting, breathy harmony that echoes across mountains, resembling a conversation with the wind itself. Siku ensembles were often played in pairs, with two musicians performing alternating notes in interlocking patterns, a technique called hocketing, which symbolized the Andean ideal of duality and balance in nature and society. Flutes, crafted from bone, clay, or reed, were also widespread. Some were so small they could be worn as necklaces, while others were large enough to produce deep, resonant tones. Many were meticulously carved into the shapes of birds, snakes, or spirits, underscoring the spiritual connection between sound and the natural world. These were not merely musical instruments, they were sacred tools. Music was employed to invoke rain, bless harvests, honor the sun, or communicate with ancestors. One particularly fascinating discovery is the ceramic whistling vessels of the Moche civilization. When water was poured into them, internal chambers forced air through a whistle, producing eerie, literally musical pottery. These were likely used in rituals, integrating water, air, and sound into a single ceremonial act. In Inca society, music accompanied every stage of life, from birth celebrations to funerals, from military parades to agricultural festivals. There was a specific melody for every moment. Inca musicians played for deities like Inti, the sun god, and Pachamama, the earth mother, offering their breath as a form of spiritual devotion. Even soldiers marched to coordinated flute music, transforming warfare into ritual choreography. Although Spanish colonization nearly eradicated many indigenous traditions, the haunting sound of Andean flutes never fully vanished. Today, their echoes can still be heard in the Peruvian highlands and Bolivian villages, an ancient voice of stone, wind, and sky, still singing in the thin air. Cosmic vibrations, the spiritual music of ancient India. In ancient India, music transcended mere performance. It was a profound act of cosmic engineering. According to Hindu philosophy, the very universe was created from sound, specifically from the primordial vibration known as Om. From this fundamental belief emerged one of the world's most intricate and enduring musical traditions, deeply rooted in ritual, mathematics, and spiritual transformation. Early texts, like the Vedas, dating back to at least 1500 BC, already contain hymns known as summon chants, which were intended to be sung, not merely recited. These hymns formed an integral part of sacred rituals, with specific melodies meticulously designed to align the soul with divine forces. The priestly class, the Brahmins, were trained not only in philosophy and fire offerings, but also in precise voice modulation and musical cadence. Precision was paramount. Theoretically, mispronouncing a note could corrupt the entire ritual. The earliest instruments employed in Vedic and post-Vedic India served both sonic and symbolic roles. The veena, a plucked string instrument with a resonating gourd, became a potent symbol of learning and divine expression. It was and remains associated with the goddess Saraswati, the deity of wisdom and the arts. Its strings were believed to echo the vibrations of the cosmos, enabling the player to connect with universal truths through melody.
Wind instruments like the bansuri, bamboo flute, were not only tools of melody, but vehicles of myth. Lord Krishna, the god of love and divine play, was frequently depicted playing the flute, charming both humans and animals. The bansuri's sound was believed to pierce the illusions of reality, Maya, and transport listeners to a higher state of consciousness. Percussion also held immense power. The mridangam and tabla were more than mere rhythm keepers. They mirrored heartbeats, breath patterns, and cosmic cycles. Rhythms, or talas, were complex mathematical patterns, some cyclical, some asymmetrical, each intrinsically linked to specific emotional states and times of day. Indian music was deeply intertwined with rasa theory, the belief that music should evoke specific emotional flavors such as love, heroism, serenity, or sorrow. Even in ancient times, ragas, melodic frameworks, were meticulously designed to stir the soul and guide meditation. Unlike many ancient traditions lost to time, India's musical roots have not only survived, but have continuously evolved. Yet at their core remains the same ancient belief: to create music is to touch the divine.
The rhythmic heartbeat of Mesoamerica, music for gods and war. In the ancient cities of Mesoamerica, from the towering pyramids of Teotihuacan to the ceremonial plazas of the Maya and Aztecs, music was inseparable from the sacred. It was not merely art, it was power, utilized to communicate with deities, sanctify blood offerings, summon rain, and instill terror in enemies. For the peoples of Mesoamerica, music functioned as ritual technology, an invisible thread connecting humans to the divine and the deceased. Drums dominated the Mesoamerican soundscape. The most iconic was the huehuetl, a tall, single-headed drum carved from hollowed tree trunks and played with bare hands. Adorned with glyphs or sacred images, the huehuetl's deep, resonant throb resonated through stone courtyards like the very heartbeat of the gods. Then came the teponaztli, a slit drum crafted from hollowed wood and played with rubber-tipped mallets. Its surface was carved into two tongues that produced distinct pitches when struck. The teponaztli was more than a percussion instrument. It could speak. In Nahuatl, the Aztec language, it was believed that the teponaztli could sing the names of deities or the rhythms of fate itself. Wind instruments were also central to their musical practices. Flutes made of bone, clay, and reed were common, often shaped like animals or gods. Some were so intricately made that they could mimic bird calls, jaguar growls, or human screams. Indeed, the infamous Aztec death whistle, shaped like a skull and blown like a flute, produced a blood-chilling screech, likely employed during warfare or sacrificial ceremonies to strike terror into enemies or to open portals to the spirit world. Music accompanied every significant event: birth, rites of passage, warfare, agricultural cycles, and death. Musicians and dancers trained in specialized schools, performing not merely for crowds, but for the gods themselves. Certain instruments were reserved exclusively for nobles or priests. Playing them incorrectly could be considered a spiritual offense. Even sacrifice, central to Aztec religion, was meticulously carried out to a precise musical score. Drums pounded, flutes wailed, and conch shells howled as hearts were offered to the sun. The music did not soothe, it activated. It guided souls, nourished gods, and ensured the continuous turning of the cosmic engine. In Mesoamerica, music was not a backdrop, it was the ceremony itself. It was not intended to entertain, it was meant to transform.
Medieval beauty standards,
spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, were a multifaceted reflection of religious beliefs, social hierarchies, and available resources. Unlike today's often singular and rapidly shifting ideals, medieval beauty was a nuanced concept, varying across social classes and evolving throughout the era. However, some core tenets remained influential, shaping perceptions of attractiveness for both men and women. For women, the ideal of beauty was heavily intertwined with religious symbolism, particularly the Virgin Mary. This ideal emphasized purity, piety, and a delicate, ethereal appearance. Pale skin was highly coveted, signifying nobility and a life sheltered from the harsh realities of manual labor. Women employed various methods to achieve this pallor, including abstaining from sun exposure and using concoctions made from herbs and even lead. Blonde or golden hair was also highly prized, often associated with angelic beauty and virtue. While natural blondes were admired, women sometimes used saffron, chamomile, or lemon juice to lighten their hair. Long, flowing locks were generally favored, often intricately braided and adorned with veils or jeweled headpieces, reflecting social status. However, the forehead was considered particularly important, and a high, broad forehead was seen as a sign of intelligence and nobility. To achieve this, some women even plucked or shaved their hairlines. The ideal medieval female figure was slender, with a gently rounded belly, indicative of childbearing potential rather than excessive thinness. Small breasts were generally preferred over larger ones. Facial features considered beautiful included a small, round face with delicate features, rosy cheeks, and full red lips. However, excessive use of artificial color on the face was often frowned upon, seen as a sign of vanity or even moral corruption. Subtlety was key, with the desired rosy glow often achieved through natural means like sleeping in a mask of raw beef or applying fruit-based pigments sparingly. For men, beauty ideals were often linked to strength, virility, and noble bearing. Fair skin was still a marker of status, distinguishing the aristocracy from the sun-tanned peasantry. However, a healthy, slightly ruddy complexion was also acceptable, suggesting vitality and vigor. Hair was an important aspect of male beauty. During the earlier medieval period, long hair was fashionable among noblemen, often styled in loose waves or curls, symbolizing power and status. Beards and mustaches also varied in popularity throughout the centuries, ranging from clean-shaven faces to full, well-maintained beards. The care and styling of male hair were significant, reflecting their social standing and attention to appearance. A well-built physique was admired in men, signifying physical prowess and the ability to perform their duties as warriors or lords. However, excessive bulkiness was not necessarily the ideal. Rather, a balanced and athletic build was preferred. Facial features considered attractive in men included strong, well-defined features and clear eyes. Across both genders, good health was a fundamental aspect of beauty. A clear complexion, bright eyes, and a lively demeanor were indicative of inner well-being, and therefore considered attractive. Dental hygiene was rudimentary, but a bright smile was still valued. It is crucial to remember that these beauty standards were largely dictated by the elite and often unattainable for the majority of the population. Peasants, engaged in manual labor, would naturally have tan skin and less opportunity for elaborate grooming. Nevertheless, these ideals permeated medieval society, influencing art, literature, and social interactions. offering a fascinating glimpse into a world with beauty priorities quite different, yet in some ways surprisingly similar to our own.